In the heart of West Africa, where the baobab trees stretch their ancient arms toward the heavens, and the red earth tells stories older than memory itself, there lived a young woman named Adoni. Now, Adoni wasn't like the other girls in her village of Iko. While they possessed the typical beauty that made suitors travel from distant lands, Adoni had been born with ears that were different. They were larger than normal ears. Much larger. So large, in fact, that they seemed to catch every whisper of wind that danced through the village. From the moment she could walk, the other children would point and giggle. "Look at elephant ears," they would shout as she passed by the marketplace. "Can you hear the ancestors calling from the spirit world?" they'd mock, covering their mouths to stifle their cruel laughter. Even the adults weren't kind. They would shake their heads and whisper to each other when they thought she couldn't hear. But oh, she could hear everything. That was both her curse and her gift. Adoni's mother, Folktale, would hold her daughter close during those painful moments. "My child," she would whisper, stroking Adoni's unusual ears with gentle fingers. "The Creator makes no mistakes. What others see as different may one day prove to be divine." But those words felt hollow to a young girl who just wanted to belong. Who just wanted to play with the other children without hearing their whispered insults. Who just wanted a young man to look at her with love instead of curiosity or pity. As Adoni grew older, the mockery only intensified. The village matchmaker would visit every family with daughters of marrying age. But she would always keep Adoni's heart. "Who would want a wife who looks like that?" the matchmaker would say to other mothers, not caring if her voice carried on the wind. And it always did carry. Straight to Adoni's extraordinary ears. The young woman learned to move through her village like a shadow. She would wake before dawn to fetch water from the river. When the paths were empty and the cruel tongues were still sleeping, she would tend to her mother's garden in the early morning hours, before the sun brought out the neighbors and their staring eyes. But there was something the villagers didn't understand about Adoni's gift. Something they were too blinded by their own prejudice to see. Those ears that they mocked so mercilessly. They could hear things that no normal human ear could detect. She could hear the heartbeat of a mouse from 50 paces away. She could detect a subtle change in a person's voice that revealed they were lying. She could sense the approaching rains hours before the clouds appeared. And most remarkably of all, she could hear danger coming from distances that would amaze you. The first time this gift revealed itself, Adoni was only 12 years old. She was sitting by the river, braiding her hair and trying to ignore the laughter of the other girls who were washing clothes nearby. Suddenly, her ears picked up a sound that made her blood run cold. A low, rumbling growl that was moving closer to the village. It was still miles away, but she could hear it as clearly as if it were right beside her. "There's a leopard coming," she shouted to the other girls. They stopped their washing and stared at her with disbelief. "Elephant Ears is hearing things again," one of them said with a cruel smile. "Maybe the voices in her head are getting louder," another added. They all burst into laughter and continued with their washing. But Adoni knew what she had heard. She ran back to the village as fast as her legs could carry her. "Mama! Mama!" she called out as she burst into their hut. "There's a leopard approaching from the eastern path." Her mother looked at her daughter's frightened face and didn't hesitate. Folktale had learned long ago to trust her daughter's unusual abilities. She immediately began beating the warning drum that sat outside their hut. The deep, resonant sound echoed throughout the village. Within minutes, the villagers had gathered their children and livestock. They secured their huts and prepared for danger. Sure enough, just as the sun was setting, a massive leopard emerged from the eastern forest. It prowled around the outskirts of the village for nearly an hour. But finding no easy prey, it eventually disappeared back into the wilderness. The village chief, an old man named Bobatond, approached Adoni that evening. "Child," he said, his voice filled with wonder. "How did you know?" Adoni touched her large ears self-consciously. "I heard it coming," Bobatond. "From how far?" "Very far. Maybe as far as the old palm grove." The chief's eyes widened. The old palm grove was at least 5 miles away. "This is a gift from the ancestors," he murmured. But even after saving the village from the leopard, even after proving that her ears could detect danger that others couldn't, the mockery continued. If anything, it got worse. Now Elephant Ears thinks she's a village guardian, the children would sneer. "Look how she walks around like she's special," the young women would whisper. "One lucky guess doesn't make her a prophet," the men would say. Each cruel word was like a spear through Adoni's heart. She began to withdraw even more from village life. She would spend long hours by herself in the forest, listening to the sounds that only she could hear. The conversations of birds in distant trees, the movement of small animals through the underbrush, the whisper of wind through leaves that carried messages from far away. It was during one of these solitary forest walks that Adoni heard something that changed everything. She was sitting beneath her favorite mahogany tree, the one where she went when the loneliness became too much to bear. When her ears picked up a sound that made her entire body freeze. It was the sound of many feet, hundreds of feet, all moving in perfect unison, all moving toward her village. But these weren't the footsteps of friends or traders. These footsteps carried a rhythm that spoke of war, a rhythm that spoke of destruction, a rhythm that spoke of death. Adoni's hands began to tremble as she pressed her large ears forward, straining to hear more details. The sound was still very far away, but it was definitely getting closer. She could make out the clanking of metal. Weapons. Lots of weapons. She could hear the low murmur of harsh voices speaking in a language she didn't recognize. And underneath it all, she could hear something that made her so cry out in anguish. The sound of chains. The sound of people in bondage. The sound of her own people being forced to march against their will. Adoni realized with growing horror that this wasn't just an army approaching. This was a slave-raiding party. And they were bringing captives with them. People who had been stolen from other villages. People who would soon join the ranks of the enslaved unless someone stopped what was coming. The sound was still at least a day's journey away. But Adoni knew that by tomorrow evening, her peaceful village of Iko would be under attack. Every person she had ever known, every child who had ever mocked her, every adult who had ever whispered about her, every elder who had ever looked at her with pity, they would all be in mortal danger. And she was the only one who knew it was coming. Her heart pounded in her chest as she realized the terrible irony of the situation. The same years that had made her an outcast, the same years that had brought her nothing but shame and ridicule, were now the only thing standing between her village and complete destruction. But would anyone believe her? Would anyone listen to the girl they called Elephant Ears? Would anyone trust the woman they had spent years mocking and rejecting? As the sun began to set behind the mahogany tree, Adoni stood up slowly, her mind racing with the weight of what she had discovered. The sounds of the approaching army grew slightly louder in her extraordinary ears. And she knew that time was running out. She had to make a choice. She could run away and save herself. Or she could return to the village that had never accepted her, and try to convince them to believe her one more time. Even though she knew they probably wouldn't. Even though she knew they would probably mock her again. Even though she knew that this time, their refusal to listen might cost them everything. As darkness fell over the forest, Adoni began walking back toward the village, her large ears still picking up the distant sounds of approaching doom, and her heart carrying the burden of knowledge that could save or damn them all. The greatest test of her life was about to begin. But first, she had to figure out how to make people who had never believed in her finally start listening. The moon was high and bright as Adoni stumbled through the familiar paths back to Iko village. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a caged bird desperate to escape. Every few steps, she would pause and tilt her large ears toward the distant forest, where those terrible sounds of marching feet and clanking chains grew steadily closer. By her estimation, the raiders would reach the village by sunset tomorrow. Maybe sooner if they pushed through the night. As she approached the outskirts of Iko, she could see the soft glow of cooking fires. and hear the gentle murmur of family settling down for the evening. Children's laughter drifted on the night air. Mothers sang lullabies to their babies. Fathers told stories around flickering flames. None of them had any idea that death was marching toward them through the darkness. Adoni's first instinct was to run straight to Chief Bobaton's compound. But as she neared the village center, she heard familiar voices that made her pause. Did you see how that strange girl ran off to the forest again? Today. It was Kemi, the baker's daughter. The same girl who had laughed the loudest when the leopard warning had saved their lives. She's getting stranger every day, came another voice. Taiwo, the blacksmith's wife. My husband says she was talking to herself by the river yesterday. Probably hearing voices again, Kemi said with a cruel giggle. Those ears of hers are so big, maybe they are picking up conversations from the spirit world. The women burst into laughter. Adoni pressed herself against the wall of a nearby hut, her eyes filling with tears. Even after everything she had done for this village, even after warning them about the leopard, they still saw her as nothing more than a source of entertainment. A freak to be mocked and dismissed. But she couldn't let her heart feelings matter now. Too many lives hung in the balance. She wiped her eyes and forced herself to move toward the chief's compound. Chief Bobaton was sitting outside his hut, smoking his evening pipe and gazing up at the stars. Chief, Adoni called out softly as she approached. The old man turned toward her voice, squinting in the moonlight. Adoni. Child, what brings you here so late? His voice was kind, but she could hear the weariness in it. The skepticism that came from years of dealing with village drama and false alarms. Bobaton, I need to tell you something important. Very important. She took a deep breath, knowing that her next words would either save her people or mark her as a mad woman forever. There are raiders coming. Many raiders. They'll be here by tomorrow evening. The chief's expression didn't change, but she saw his grip tighten on his pipe. Raiders, you say? How do you know this, child? I heard them, Bobaton. I heard them marching through the forest. They have weapons. And they have captives with them. People in chains. The chief was quiet for a long moment, studying her face in the pale moonlight. You heard all this? Yes. From how far away? Adoni hesitated, knowing how impossible her answer would sound. Very far, Boba. At least a day's journey. Maybe more. Chief Bobaton set down his pipe and leaned forward. Adoni, that would be impossible for normal ears. I know how it sounds. But my ears aren't normal, Bobaton. You know this. You've seen what they can do. The old man nodded slowly. He remembered the leopard incident. He remembered other times when Adoni had detected things that no one else could sense. But this was asking him to believe something that challenged everything he understood about human capabilities. If what you say is true, he said carefully, then we must act quickly. But if you are mistaken. He didn't finish the sentence, but Adoni understood. If she was wrong, and he roused the entire village for nothing, his leadership would be questioned. Her reputation would be destroyed forever. And the mockery she endured would become unbearable. I'm not mistaken, Bobaton. I can still hear them now. They are getting closer. As if to prove her point, she tilted her head and pressed her large ears forward. After a moment of intense concentration, her face went pale. They've stopped for the night. But they'll start moving again before dawn. There are so many of them, Boba. So many. The chief studied her face, looking for any sign of deception or madness. But all he saw was genuine terror. An absolute certainty. Very well, he said finally. I will call for the village council. But Adoni, if you are wrong about this, I understand, she whispered. Within an hour, the 5 members of the village council had gathered in Chief Bobaton's compound. They sat in a semicircle around a small fire, their faces grave and skeptical. These were the most respected men in Iko village. warriors who had fought in battles, elders who had survived famines and droughts, wise men who had guided the village through countless crises. And now they were being asked to believe the word of a young woman that most of them considered to be different. "Tell them what you told me," Chief Bobaton said gently. Adoni looked around the circle of weathered faces. Some showed curiosity. Others showed doubt. A few showed barely concealed annoyance at being woken up for what they probably considered to be nonsense. "Respected elders," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "I have heard the approach of a large raiding party. They are traveling with captives. They have many weapons. And they will reach our village tomorrow evening." Elder Korid, the oldest member of the council, stroked his white beard thoughtfully. "Young woman," he said in a voice like rustling leaves, "these are serious accusations. Very serious. If we prepare for war based on your hearing, and no enemies appear, the consequences could be severe. For all of us. But especially for you." Adoni felt the weight of their stares. She could hear the doubt in their voices. The same doubt that had followed her all her life. But she could also still hear those distant sounds of marching feet and rattling chains. Getting closer with each passing hour. "I know how it sounds," she said, her voice growing stronger. "I know you have reasons to doubt me. But I also know what I can hear. And I would rather face your anger for being wrong than live with the guilt of staying silent while our people are slaughtered." Elder Adebayo, a former warrior with scars crisscrossing his arms, leaned forward. "This girl has shown unusual abilities before," he said grudgingly. "The leopard incident. That was real. But this?" He shook his head. "This is asking us to believe she can hear an army from impossible distances." "Not impossible," said a new voice from the shadows. Everyone turned as Adoni's mother, Folek, stepped into the circle of firelight. "Mama, what are you doing here?" Adoni whispered. "I heard the drums calling for counsel," Folek replied. "And I knew you would need someone to speak for you." She turned to face the elders, her chin raised with quiet dignity. "Respected fathers of our village," she said formally. "My daughter was born different. You all know this. But different doesn't mean cursed. Different doesn't mean worthless. Sometimes different means blessed. Sometimes different means chosen." Elder Korid raised an eyebrow. "Chosen for what, woman?" "To hear what others cannot hear. To see what others cannot see. To protect what others cannot protect." Folek's voice grew passionate as she continued. "How many times has my daughter's gift saved lives? The leopard was just the beginning. She has warned of storms before they arrived. She has detected sickness in livestock before it spread. She has found lost children by hearing their cries from distances that amazed us all. And now she comes to you with the most important warning of her life? And you sit here debating whether to believe her." The council members exchanged uncomfortable glances. They couldn't deny that Adoni had demonstrated unusual abilities over the years. But this claim was so extraordinary. So beyond the realm of normal human experience. "Even if we believed her," Elder Taiwo said slowly, "what would you have us do? Evacuate the entire village based on sounds that only she can hear? Send our warriors to fight phantoms in the forest? Risk our lives and our reputation on the word of one girl?" Before Adoni could respond, a new sound reached her extraordinary ears. A sound that made her blood turn to ice water in her veins. The marching had resumed. But now it was much, much closer than before. And there was something else. Something that made her grab her mother's arm in terror. "They're not stopping for the full night," she gasped. "They're moving faster now. They'll be here by midday. Not sunset. Midday." The council members stared at her in confusion. "What is she talking about?" Elder Adebayo demanded. But Adoni was no longer listening to their doubts. She was listening to the approaching thunder of hundreds of feet. She was listening to the sharp commands being barked in a foreign tongue. She was listening to the quiet sobs of the captives who were being driven forward like cattle. And most terrifying of all, she was listening to the hungry anticipation in the raiders' voices as they discussed what they would do when they reached the next village. Her village. Her people. They know we're here, she whispered, her face going white with horror. They have scouts. They've been watching us. They know exactly how many warriors we have. They know exactly when to attack for maximum surprise. The elders were beginning to look genuinely concerned now. Not because they fully believed her, but because the terror in her voice was absolutely genuine. This wasn't the behavior of someone seeking attention or trying to cause drama. This was the behavior of someone who had seen true evil approaching. Someone who was watching death march toward everyone she had ever known. If what you say is true, Chief Bobaton said carefully, then we have very little time to prepare. Less time than you think, Adoni replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Because now she could hear something new in the distant cacophony of approaching doom. The raiders were no longer just marching. They were running. And they were getting closer with each passing moment. The transformation in the council was immediate and dramatic. Elder Adebayo shot to his feet, his warrior instinct overriding his skepticism. If they are running, then we have hours, not a full day. Chief Bobaton's voice cut through the night air like a blade. Sound the war drums. Wake every soul in this village. Now. Within minutes, the deep boom of the warning drums echoed across Eco Village. People stumbled from their huts, confused and frightened. Children cried as their mothers snatched them from their sleeping mats. Men grabbed their spears and machetes. Women began gathering their most precious possessions. But in the chaos, Adoni heard something that made her heart sink. This is madness, someone shouted. We're evacuating because Elephant Ears had another dream. She's finally driven our chief completely mad. Even now, with danger racing toward them, some villagers were more concerned with mocking her than saving their own lives. But Chief Bobaton had made his choice. He climbed onto the ceremonial platform in the village center and raised his staff for silence. People of Eco, his voice boomed. We have received warning of approaching raiders. You will take your families to the caves in the northern hills. The warriors will remain to defend our home. You have 1 hour to gather what you can carry. Move quickly. Move quietly. And trust in the wisdom of our ancestors. The crowd erupted in confused chatter. How do you know raiders are coming? Called out Kemi's father. Who brought this warning? Demanded another villager. Chief Bobaton looked directly at Adoni, who stood trembling beside her mother. The warning came from one who has saved us before. And I choose to believe her. As the villagers reluctantly began their preparations, Adoni's extraordinary ears continued tracking the approaching threat. She could hear individual voices now in the raiding party. Commands being shouted. Weapons being readied. The cruel laughter of men who thought they were about to surprise a defenseless village. Boba turned, she whispered urgently. They are almost at the old riverbank. Maybe 2 hours away now. The chief nodded grimly and turned to his warriors. You heard her. Positions. The evacuation moved with surprising speed. Families streamed toward the northern hills, carrying babies and bundles of belongings. The elderly were helped along the rocky paths by younger relatives. Children who had spent years mocking Adoni now followed her mother's directions without question. As dawn broke over the horizon, Eco Village stood nearly empty. Only 20 warriors remained, hidden in strategic positions around the settlement. And Adoni. She had refused to leave with the other civilians. My ears are your greatest weapon, she had told Chief Bobaton. You need me here. Now she crouched behind the great baobab tree at the village's edge. Her large ears pressed forward, tracking every sound of the approaching raiders. They are at the eastern ridge, she whispered to the chief beside her. 60 men. Maybe 70. They have clubs and crude spears. And they are confident. Too confident. Chief Bobaton smiled grimly. Good. Overconfident enemies make mistakes. As the first raiders emerged from the forest, whooping and yelling their war cries, they found exactly what they expected. An apparently defenseless village. Hut standing open and unguarded. Cook fire still smoldering. No warriors in sight. They charged into the village center, shouting with gleeful anticipation. But Adoni heard what they couldn't. The subtle movement of Chief Bobaton's warriors surrounding them. The careful placement of feet on familiar ground. The quiet drawing of bowstrings. Now, she whispered. Chief Bobaton raised his hand. Then dropped it. 20 arrows flew simultaneously from 20 hidden positions. The raiders' triumphant shouts turned to screams of confusion and pain. Before they could recover, the warriors of Iko emerged from their hiding places. The battle was swift and decisive. Within an hour, it was over. Those raiders who survived fled back into the forest, carrying word of a village that was far from defenseless. As the sun climbed higher, the evacuated families began returning to their homes. They found their village intact. Their warriors victorious. Their lives saved by a warning that had seemed impossible to believe. Chief Bobaton stood in the village center, his arm around Adoni's shoulders. People of Iko, he called out as the crowd gathered. Today we learned something important. We learned that the Creator's gifts come in many forms. And sometimes, what we see as different. What we see as strange. What we choose to mock and dismiss. Is actually our salvation. He turned to face Adoni directly. This village owes its life to these ears. To this woman. To our guardian. The silence that followed was profound. Then, slowly, one by one, the villagers began to approach Adoni. Kemi was the first. Her eyes filled with tears as she took Adoni's hands. Forgive me, she whispered. Forgive us all. From that day forward, the village of Iko was forever changed. Children grew up hearing stories of the woman whose different ears saved everyone they loved. Young people learned that true strength often comes disguised as weakness. And Adoni finally understood what her mother had always known. The Creator makes no mistakes. Sometimes our greatest gifts come wrapped in packages that the world doesn't understand. Sometimes the very things that make us outcasts are the same things that make us heroes. And in the heart of West Africa, where the baobab trees still stretch their ancient arms toward the heavens, they still tell the story of the woman with the extraordinary ears. The woman who proved that being different isn't a curse. It's a calling.